The sound of a gunshot echoed through the frozen Montana wilderness, shattering the eerie silence of the December night just as Tallulah Ryder's body hit the snow. Blood from her split lip stained the pristine white ground beneath her, a stark crimson against the pale canvas of winter. The year was 1883, and Miles City, Montana, was no place for a woman alone, especially one who dared to speak her mind to the wrong man. The cold bit into Tallulah's skin through her torn dress, the icy wind stealing what little warmth remained in her battered body. She could hear the retreating laughter of the men who had ambushed her on her way home from her position as a schoolteacher. Men who worked for Victor Blackwell, the cattle baron who'd been trying to force her to sell her small parcel of land. They'd left her to die in the growing blizzard, miles from town, with night falling fast. Tallulah tried to push herself up, but her arms trembled and gave way beneath her. 26 years of life hadn't prepared her for such cruelty. The snow began falling more heavily now, already starting to cover her skirts. She knew with terrifying clarity that she wouldn't survive the night. A tear froze on her cheek as she thought of the small cabin she'd worked so hard to keep after her father's passing, a cabin she would never see again. The distant sound of hoofbeats penetrated her fading consciousness. Perhaps Blackwell's men were returning to finish what they'd started. Tallulah closed her eyes, too weak to fight or flee. The hoofbeats stopped and she heard the crunch of boots on snow. "Good Lord," a deep voice murmured. "What happened here?" Tallulah felt gentle hands turn her over, and she forced her swollen eyes open to see a man kneeling beside her. His face was partially obscured by a bandana pulled up against the cold, but she could see concern in his blue eyes as he surveyed her injuries. "Miss. Can you hear me?" He pulled the bandana down, revealing a strong jawline covered with several days' worth of stubble. "I'm Finn Weston. I've got a cabin not far from here. I need to get you out of this cold before you freeze to death." Before Tallulah could respond, he was shrugging out of his heavy coat and wrapping it around her. Next came a fur-lined buffalo robe from his saddle, which he tucked carefully around her battered form. "I'm going to pick you up now," he warned, his voice gentle despite its roughness. "It might hurt, and I apologize for that." Tallulah whimpered as he lifted her, the movement sending pain shooting through her ribs. He carried her to his horse, a sturdy palomino that stood patiently in the falling snow. "Easy now," Finn murmured, settling her in the saddle before mounting behind her. His arms came around her as he took the reins, creating a fortress of warmth against the biting cold. "My cabin's just over that ridge. You'll be safe there." Tallulah wanted to thank him, to ask questions, to understand why a stranger would help her when the people she'd known in town had stood by while Blackwell's men harassed her for months. But consciousness was slipping away, the combination of cold, pain, and exhaustion finally claiming her. The last thing she remembered was the steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the solid warmth of the cowboy at her back. When Tallulah awoke, she was lying on a narrow bed in a small but tidy cabin. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on log walls adorned with simple furnishings. She was no longer wearing her torn dress, but was instead wrapped in soft flannel and covered with several thick furs. "You're awake," said the same deep voice she remembered from the snow. "I was starting to worry." Finn Weston moved into her line of sight, carrying a steaming mug. He was taller than she'd realized, with broad shoulders and a lean frame that spoke of a life of hard work. His dark blonde hair fell in waves to his collar, and those blue eyes studied her with a mixture of concern and caution. "How long?" Tallulah croaked, her throat dry and painful. "Nearly 2 days," he replied, helping her sit up enough to sip from the mug. It contained a bitter herbal tea that soothed her parched throat. "You've had a fever. I did my best to tend your wounds, but I'm no doctor." Tallulah became acutely aware that someone had undressed her, cleaned her injuries, and put her in fresh clothing. Heat rushed to her face. My clothes." She stammered. "I kept my eyes closed as much as possible," Finn said, a slight flush creeping up his neck. "But your dress was wet and torn, and your injuries needed tending. I have a sister had a sister. I know it wasn't proper, but you might have died otherwise." His mention of a sister and the pain that flashed across his face when he corrected himself made Tallulah soften. "Thank you," she said simply, "for saving my life." "Who did this to you?" he asked, setting the mug aside and perching on the edge of a wooden chair beside the bed. "Victor Blackwell's men," she answered, watching his expression darken. "He wants my land. When I wouldn't sell, he decided to convince me more, forcefully." "Blackwell," Finn spat the name like it tasted foul. "I know him, the whole territory knows him. Man thinks he owns everything between here and Helena." "He nearly owns me now," Tallulah said bitterly. "I can't fight him anymore, not after this." "You're safe here," Finn assured her. "My place is hidden enough. Blackwell doesn't even know it exists. Why would you risk helping me?" Tallulah asked, studying the cowboy's weathered face. He couldn't be more than 30, but his eyes held the wisdom of a man who'd seen much hardship. Finn looked away, gazing into the fire. "Let's just say I have no love for men who hurt those weaker than themselves." He stood abruptly. "You should rest. I'll fix some broth for when you wake again." For the next week, Tallulah drifted between sleep and wakefulness as her body healed. Finn cared for her with surprising gentleness for a man with such calloused hands. He changed the bandages on her cuts, helped her sip broth and tea, and kept the cabin warm despite the howling blizzard that had descended upon the Montana wilderness. When she was finally strong enough to sit up and feed herself, Tallulah began to learn more about her rescuer. Finn Weston was a former ranch hand who'd saved enough to buy this small parcel of land 2 years earlier. He raised horses, not many, just enough to sell a few each year at the spring auctions. He lived alone except for his dog, a one-eared mutt named Scout who had taken an immediate liking to Tallulah. "Were you born in Montana territory?" she asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Tallulah wrapped in a quilt in the rocking chair while Finn whittled a piece of wood. "No," he replied, his knife pausing. "Texas, came north after the war, though I was too young to fight in it. My pa didn't come back, and Ma couldn't keep the place going." "I'm sorry," Tallulah said softly. "My father brought me to Montana after my mother died, said the fresh air would do us good. He was a schoolteacher like me." "Is that why you're fighting so hard to keep your land?" Finn asked. "Because it was his," Tallulah nodded, looking down at her hands. The bruises had begun to fade to a sickly yellow-green. "It's all I have left of him, but more than that, it's mine. I've worked for it, taught children whose parents paid me in chickens and potatoes more often than cash. I've repaired that cabin with my own hands. Why should I have to give it up because Victor Blackwell decided he wants to run cattle on it?" Finn's blue eyes met hers, something like admiration flickering in their depths. "You've got grit, Miss Ryder, I'll give you that." "Tallulah," she corrected him. "After all you've done for me, I think you can use my given name." "Tallulah," he repeated, the name sounding like music in his low drawl. "That's a beautiful name." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the snap of the fire and the soft whine of Scout dreaming by the hearth. Tallulah found herself studying Finn's hands as he worked the wood, transforming it into what appeared to be a small horse. They were strong hands, capable of gentleness despite their obvious power. She wondered what they would feel like against her cheek, and the thought made her flush. "What will you do?" Finn asked suddenly. "When you're well enough to leave," the question jolted Tallulah from her inappropriate thoughts. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't go back to my cabin, not with Blackwell's men watching for me, and the town. Well, the townspeople are too afraid of Blackwell to stand with me. You could stay," Finn said, the words coming out in a rush. He kept his eyes on his whittling. "Until spring, at least. No one comes this way in winter." "I couldn't impose on you like that," Tallulah protested, though the thought of leaving the safety of Finn's cabin filled her with dread. "It's no imposition," he insisted. "I've grown used to having someone to talk to besides Scout." He gave a half smile. "Besides, it's not as if you can travel anywhere in this weather." As if to emphasize his point, the wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. Tallulah smiled gratefully. "Then I accept your hospitality, Mr. Weston, at least until the spring thaw." "Finn," he corrected, mirroring her earlier words. "After all, we're going to be sharing this cabin for quite a while. The next morning, Tallulah awoke to find Finn gone, a note explaining he'd gone to check his trap lines. Since arriving at the cabin, she'd mostly stayed in bed or in the rocking chair, but today she felt strong enough to explore her temporary home. The cabin was small but well built, with the main room containing the fireplace, a small table with 2 chairs and a rocking chair. A curtain separated this area from Finn's sleeping space, which he'd surrendered to her during her recovery while he slept on a bedroll by the fire. Near the door sat a rough-hewn desk where Finn kept his few books: a Bible, a book on horse breeding, and surprisingly, a volume of Tennyson's poetry. Beside the books lay a journal, its leather cover worn from use. Tallulah knew she shouldn't pry, but curiosity got the better of her. She flipped it open to find not the personal writings she'd expected, but detailed drawings, horses primarily, but also landscapes, birds, and other wildlife, all rendered with surprising skill. "My ma taught me," Finn's voice came from behind her, making her jump guiltily. He stood in the doorway, snow melting from his hat and coat, a string of rabbits in his hand. "Said a man ought to have a gentler pursuit than just breaking horses and shooting game." "They're beautiful," Tallulah said honestly, closing the journal. "I'm sorry for snooping." Finn shrugged, hanging his coat by the door. "Nothing to hide in there, just scratches on paper." "You're too modest," she countered. "These are works of art." A flush crept up Finn's neck as he busied himself with the rabbits. "Never showed them to anyone before." "Most cowboys would laugh at a man who draws flowers." "Then most cowboys are fools," Tallulah said firmly. Finn glanced at her, surprise and something warmer flashing in his eyes. "You're not what I expected, Tallulah Ryder, and what did you expect?" she asked, moving to help him prepare the rabbits for stew. "I'm not sure," he admitted, "but not a schoolteacher who stands up to Victor Blackwell and then calls cowboys fools to my face." Tallulah laughed, the first real laugh since her attack, and the sound brightened the small cabin. "Well, you're not what I expected either, Finn Weston. Not many men would rescue a stranger in a snowstorm, care for her wounds, and then share their home and food without asking for anything in return." "Maybe we're both exceptions," he suggested, his voice softer. Their eyes met over the wooden table, and something electric passed between them, something neither was ready to acknowledge. The days began to settle into a comfortable routine. As Tallulah's strength returned, she insisted on contributing to the household chores. She couldn't go outside in the bitter cold yet, but she could cook, mend, and keep the cabin tidy while Finn tended his horses, checked his traps, and chopped firewood. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire. Sometimes Finn would read aloud from his small collection of books, his deep voice bringing the words to life in a way Tallulah had never experienced. Other times, she would share stories of her students or her life before Montana. Occasionally, they simply sat in companionable silence, Finn drawing in his journal while Tallulah worked on mending his shirts. One night, as a particularly fierce storm howled outside, Tallulah asked the question that had been on her mind for days. "Why do you live so isolated, Finn? You're clearly educated, skilled with horses. You could work on any ranch in the territory." Finn's hands stilled on his drawing. For a long moment, Tallulah thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he set his pencil down. "I was a ranch foreman for the Circle T just outside Miles City," he began. "Good outfit, fair boss. We had trouble with rustlers' organized gang, not just opportunists. During a raid, I shot one of them." He paused, the firelight casting shadows across his face. Turned out he was the younger brother of the sheriff at the time. "Sheriff didn't care that his brother was stealing cattle, said he'd see me hang." "What happened?" Tallulah asked softly. "My boss helped me escape, gave me enough money to buy this place. The sheriff was eventually removed for corruption, but by then..." Finn shrugged. "I'd found I preferred the quiet up here. People complicate things." "All people?" Tallulah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Finn looked at her then, really looked at her, his eyes reflecting the fire's glow. "Not all," he said softly. "Some make the complications worthwhile." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words. Tallulah felt her heart beating faster as Finn's gaze lingered on her face. He was the first to break the moment, clearing his throat and returning to his drawing. "What about you?" he asked. "Why haven't you married?" "Pretty schoolteacher like you must have had suitors." Tallulah smoothed the shirt she was mending, considering her answer. "There were a few men who expressed interest, but none who saw me as more than a potential wife and mother. They wanted someone to cook their meals and bear their children, not someone with opinions of her own." "Their loss," Finn commented, not looking up from his journal. "Besides," she continued, emboldened by his response, "I wanted to prove I could make my own way. My father left me that cabin and enough money to live on for a year. Everyone expected me to sell it and move back east to live with my aunt or find a husband to take care of me. I wanted to show them and myself that I didn't need rescuing." A wry smile touched her lips. "Until I did need rescuing and you found me in the snow, needing help doesn't make you weak," Finn said, finally meeting her eyes again. "It makes you human." The days turned into weeks and January gave way to February. The bitter Montana winter showed no signs of relenting, but inside the small cabin, something was blooming despite the frozen landscape outside. One morning, Finn announced he needed to make a trip into Miles City for supplies. "We're running low on flour and coffee," he explained as he pulled on his heavy coat. "And I need to check if there's any news about Blackwell or if anyone's looking for you." Tallulah felt a surge of anxiety. "It's not safe. What if someone recognizes you or follows you back?" "I've been making these trips for years," Finn assured her. "I know how to come and go without being noticed. Besides, we can't hide forever. We need to know what we're facing." The word "we" sent a warm flutter through Tallulah's chest, but worry still creased her brow. "Promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," he said, his gloved hand briefly touching her cheek in a gesture so tender it nearly took her breath away. "I'll be back by nightfall. Keep Scout with you and the rifle loaded just in case." After he left, the cabin felt emptier than Tallulah had expected. She'd grown accustomed to Finn's presence, the sound of his movements, his deep voice, even his silences. She busied herself with chores, but her mind kept returning to the brief touch of his hand on her face and the look in his eyes when he'd said it, a look that suggested he was as affected by their growing closeness as she was. The short winter day was already fading when Scout's ears perked up. The dog moved to the window, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Tallulah grabbed the rifle Finn had shown her how to use and moved cautiously to peek outside. Relief flooded her when she saw Finn's familiar figure approaching on horseback, but it quickly turned to alarm when she realized he was slumped forward in the saddle. She flung open the door, ignoring the blast of cold air that hit her. "Finn." He managed to dismount, though he staggered as his boots hit the ground. Blood stained the snow beneath him. "Inside," he gasped, clutching his side. "Not safe out here." Tallulah helped him into the cabin, her heart pounding with fear as she felt the warm wetness of blood on her hands. Once inside, she helped him to the bed, her hands shaking as she removed his coat to reveal a bullet wound in his left side. "What happened?" she demanded, already gathering clean cloths and the whiskey Finn kept for medicinal purposes. "Blackwell's men," Finn hissed as she began cleaning the wound. "They were in town. One recognized me from when I worked at Circle T, must have been following me for a while." He gritted his teeth as she poured whiskey over the wound. "I lost them in the forest, doubled back. Don't think they followed me here, but we can't be sure." "You're losing too much blood," Tallulah said, fear making her voice tremble. "The bullet went through," he managed. "Clean shot, just need to stop the bleeding." Tallulah worked quickly, cleaning and bandaging the wound as best she could with shaking hands. Finn's face had gone pale, his usually tanned skin now ashen with pain and blood loss. When she finally finished, he lay back against the pillows, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "I'm sorry," he murmured as she wiped blood from her hands. "Brought trouble to your doorstep." "My doorstep?" Tallulah gave a shaky laugh. "This is your cabin, Finn, and if anyone brought trouble, it was me. Blackwell was after me first." "Got news in town," Finn said, his voice growing fainter. "Blackwell's been telling everyone you're dead, found your body after the storm, he claims." The information sent a chill through Tallulah, so he thinks he's won. For now, Finn agreed, his eyelids growing heavy, gives us time. His voice trailed off as he lost consciousness, leaving Tallulah to watch over him through the night, changing his bandages, bathing his fevered brow, and praying that the man who had saved her life wouldn't lose his own because of it. Morning found Finn weak but awake, his fever broken. Tallulah had dozed off in the chair beside the bed, her hand still holding his. When she stirred, she found him watching her, a soft expression in his eyes despite the pain he must have been feeling. "You stayed all night," he observed, his voice rough. "Of course I did," she replied, suddenly self-conscious about their joined hands. She started to pull away, but Finn tightened his grip slightly. "Thank you," he said simply, "for taking care of me." "You took care of me first," Tallulah reminded him, allowing her hand to remain in his. Over the next several days, their roles reversed as Tallulah became the caretaker and Finn the patient. He chafed at the confinement, used to being active from dawn till dusk, but his body needed time to heal. Tallulah insisted he remain in bed, bringing him meals and changing his bandages. The bullet had missed any vital organs, but he'd lost a significant amount of blood, and the wound needed to be kept clean to prevent infection. During this time, something shifted between them. The forced proximity, the vulnerability of Finn's condition, and the shared danger of their situation broke down the last barriers of reserve. They talked more openly than before, sharing not just stories but hopes, fears, and regrets. "I always wanted children," Tallulah admitted one evening as she sat beside his bed, darning a sock. "A house full of them with books and music and laughter." "You'd be a wonderful mother," Finn said, watching her nimble fingers work. "Patient, kind, but firm when needed. What about you?" She asked, keeping her eyes on her work. "Did you ever think about having a family?" Finn was quiet for so long that Tallulah thought he might have fallen asleep. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft with memory. "There was a girl back in Texas, Mary Beth Simmons. We were going to marry when I turned 18. A shadow crossed his face. "She died of typhoid fever 3 weeks before the wedding. After that, I couldn't imagine being with anyone else, so I came north, worked cattle, kept to myself." "I'm so sorry, Finn," Tallulah said, placing her hand over his. "It was a long time ago," he said, turning his hand to clasp hers. Lately I've been thinking that maybe the heart can heal after all." The look he gave her left no doubt about his meaning, and Tallulah felt heat rise to her cheeks. Neither spoke the words hovering between them, but something had been acknowledged that couldn't be undone. As February turned to March, Finn regained his strength. The wound healed cleanly, leaving a puckered scar that would always remind them both of how close they'd come to losing each other. The snow began to melt, and the first signs of spring appeared in the Montana wilderness patches of bare ground, the return of birdsong, longer days filled with sunshine. With the changing season came the knowledge that decisions would soon have to be made. Tallulah could no longer use the weather as a reason to stay, and the threat of Blackwell remained, even if he believed her dead one morning. Finn announced he was well enough to check his trap lines and asked if she'd like to accompany him. Eager to leave the cabin after months of confinement, Tallulah readily agreed. He helped her onto his spare horse, a gentle mare named Daisy, and they rode out into the crisp morning air. The forest was coming alive around them, the smell of pine and melting snow fresh and invigorating after the long winter. Finn led her through stands of lodgepole pine and across small meadows where the first green shoots were pushing through the remaining snow. He pointed out deer tracks, showed her where a fox had made its den, and identified birds by their calls. "It's beautiful here," Tallulah said as they paused by a stream, the water running clear and cold over stones. "So peaceful." "It is," Finn agreed, watching her instead of the scenery. "More beautiful than it's ever been before." Tallulah turned to find him looking at her with an intensity that made her heart skip. They'd been dancing around their feelings for weeks, neither willing to be the first to speak them aloud. But here, in the awakening forest, something in Finn's reserve seemed to have broken. "Tallulah," he began, stepping closer, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly without thinking of obligation or gratitude or anything else. She nodded, her throat suddenly dry. When spring comes fully and the roads are clear, do you want to go back to your life in town? Or, he took a deep breath, or could you see yourself staying here with me? The question hung between them, as momentous as the changing of seasons. Tallulah looked into his blue eyes, seeing hope and fear in equal measure. I've been thinking about that very question, she admitted. My cabin in town, it's just a place. My life there was lonely, even surrounded by people. Here, with just you and Scout. She smiled, reaching out to take his hand. I've never felt less alone. Relief and joy washed over Finn's face. He pulled her closer, his free hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. I never thought I'd feel this way again, he said softly. Never thought I'd want to. But you've changed everything, Tallulah. I love you. I love you too, she whispered, the words feeling right and true as they left her lips. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, as if he feared she might break or change her mind. But Tallulah responded with a fervor that surprised them both, wrapping her arms around his neck and pressing closer. Finn's arms encircled her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground as the kiss deepened, becoming a promise of all that lay ahead. They returned to the cabin with a new lightness between them, hands entwined, the future suddenly clear and bright. That night, as they sat before the fire, they began to make plans, practical plans for building a life together. Blackwell still thinks I'm dead, Tallulah mused. And he never knew about your connection to me, which gives us an advantage, Finn agreed. I can go into Miles City, file the paperwork to sell your cabin and land, use a different name if needed. But where would we live? Tallulah asked. Here, it's wonderful, but... She gestured around the small cabin. It's rather small for the family we both want. Finn smiled at her mention of a family. I've been saving to expand this place, he admitted. Add another room, maybe two, build a proper barn for the horses. He took her hands in his. With the money from selling your land, we could do it right, make this a real home. It already is a home, Tallulah said softly. But yes, a few more rooms would be nice, especially if we're to fill them with children someday. The tenderness in Finn's expression made her heart swell. I never thought I'd have this chance again, he said. To build a life with someone I love. Neither did I, Tallulah agreed. But then you found me in the snow. Their newfound happiness gave them courage to face the challenges ahead. The most pressing was dealing with Tallulah's property and the threat of Victor Blackwell. After much discussion, they formulated a plan. Finn would go to Miles City alone, using a different name. He would contact a lawyer recommended by the storekeeper, a man known for his discretion and honesty. Through this lawyer, they would sell Tallulah's cabin and land to a third party, not to Blackwell, which would only encourage his tactics, but to another family looking for a fresh start. It's not giving in, Finn assured Tallulah when she expressed doubts about selling. It's choosing a different battlefield, one where we have the advantage. The day Finn left for town was tense for both of them. The memory of his last trip, which had ended with him bleeding from a bullet wound, was still fresh in their minds. Tallulah kissed him fiercely before he mounted his horse. Come back to me, she whispered against his lips. No heroics, no confrontations, just the legal paperwork and home. I promise, he said, cupping her face in his hands, I'll be back before you know it. The hours of his absence stretched endlessly for Tallulah. She kept busy with chores, played with Scout, and even sketched in Finn's journal a surprise for when he returned. But her ears strained for the sound of hoofbeats, and her eyes continually drifted to the window. When she finally heard a horse approaching, the sun was already setting. She ran to the door, relief flooding her as she saw Finn riding toward the cabin, whole and unharmed. She flew down the steps to meet him, not caring about the mud that soaked her skirts. Finn swung down from the saddle and caught her in his arms, lifting her off the ground in a fierce embrace before setting her down for a proper kiss. Everything went well, she asked when they finally broke apart. Better than we could have hoped, he confirmed, leading his horse toward the small stable with Tallulah at his side. The lawyer James Foster, he knew your father, said he'd been troubled by Blackwell's tactics for years, but hadn't been able to prove anything. When I explained the situation, he agreed to handle the sale quietly. And Blackwell still thinks you're dead, Finn said grimly, even had the gall to attend a memorial service the townspeople held for you last month. A memorial, Tallulah was stunned. They thought enough of me to hold a service. According to Foster, the whole town turned out. Your students left flowers at the schoolhouse. Finn squeezed her hand. You were loved, Tallulah, more than you knew. Tears pricked at her eyes, and now they all think I'm dead. For now, Finn said, his voice gentler. But Foster thinks we should wait until your land is sold and Blackwell has moved on to other targets before revealing the truth. It's safer that way. Tallulah nodded, understanding the wisdom of the plan even as she felt the sadness of being officially dead to the world she'd known. There's something else, Finn added as they entered the cabin, removing his coat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. I had an errand of my own in town. He opened the pouch and tipped a simple gold band into his palm. It was my mother's, he explained. I've kept it all these years, never thinking I'd have a reason to use it. He took Tallulah's hand, his eyes serious. I know we've already decided to build a life together, but I want to do this properly. Tallulah Ryder, will you marry me? Tears spilled down Tallulah's cheeks as she nodded, too overcome to speak for a moment. Yes, she finally managed. Yes, I will marry you, Finn Weston. He slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms, his kiss a seal on their promise to each other. The next 2 months passed in a blur of activity. Spring arrived in earnest, turning the landscape from white to green. Finn and Tallulah worked side by side to prepare for their future, expanding the garden, repairing winter damage to the cabin, and planning the additions they would build once the sale of Tallulah's property was complete. Word came from James Foster that he had found a buyer, a family from Minnesota with 3 young children. The father was a carpenter who wanted to open a shop in Miles City. The price was fair, and the sale would be completed by the end of May. A carpenter, Tallulah mused when Finn shared the news. The children will love the little bedroom upstairs. And a carpenter's shop will be good for the town, Finn added, better than more of Blackwell's cattle. With the future of her property resolved, Tallulah could focus fully on her new life with Finn. They were married on a clear day in early June, with only James Foster and his wife as witnesses. The ceremony was held outside the cabin, with mountains as their cathedral and wildflowers as Tallulah's bouquet. Foster had brought news that Victor Blackwell had indeed moved on to pressuring other landowners, apparently satisfied that Tallulah Ryder was no longer an obstacle. This confirmation allowed them to begin thinking about how Tallulah might eventually resurrect herself to those who had known her, particularly her students, whom she missed terribly. Perhaps in a year or 2, Foster suggested after the simple ceremony. When Blackwell has either succeeded in his land grab or moved on to other territories. By then, the story of your survival and new life could be told with minimal risk. And in the meantime, Finn added, his arm around his new wife's waist, we'll build our own life here. As summer bloomed across the Montana wilderness, Finn and Tallulah Weston began that life in earnest. With the money from the sale of her property, they hired men from a nearby logging camp to help build the additions to the cabin, a larger kitchen, a second bedroom, and a covered porch. Finn expanded his small herd of horses, focusing on breeding stock that would bring good prices at future auctions. Tallulah discovered an unexpected talent for gardening, expanding beyond the basic vegetables to include medicinal herbs and flowers. She also began teaching again, in a way riding with Finn to the scattered homesteads in the region to offer lessons to children too far from town to attend the regular school. You're bringing light to places that have been in darkness, Finn told her one evening as they sat on their new porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, just like you did for me. We brought light to each other, Tallulah corrected him, leaning her head on his shoulder. From the moment you found me in the snow. In late August, as the first hints of autumn touched the highest peaks, Tallulah shared news that brought tears of joy to Finn's eyes. She was expecting their first child, due in the early spring. That night, as they lay in their bed listening to the gentle summer rain on the roof, Finn placed his hand on Tallulah's still flat stomach, wonder in his expression. "Life has a strange way of bringing gifts out of tragedy," he murmured. "If Blackwell's men hadn't attacked you, if I hadn't been riding that trail that night, we might never have found each other," Tallulah finished, covering his hand with her own. "I can't say I'm grateful for the beating, but I am grateful for what came after." She smiled up at him in the dim light. "Every scar has led us here." Winter returned to the Montana wilderness, but this time Tallulah welcomed it without fear. The cabin was snug and warm, expanded now to accommodate the growing family. Finn had built a sturdy cradle that sat waiting in the corner of their bedroom, and Tallulah had sewn tiny clothes from soft flannel. As Christmas approached, bringing with it memories of the previous year's violence and rescue, James Foster arrived with unexpected news. Victor Blackwell had been arrested for land fraud and intimidation. Several of his former victims, emboldened by his legal troubles, had come forward with their own stories of threats and violence. "The prosecutor believes he'll serve time," Foster explained as he warmed himself by the Weston's fire. "His empire is crumbling." The news brought a sense of closure to Tallulah. "Does this mean I can come back from the dead?" she asked, one hand resting on her now visible pregnancy. "I think it's time," Foster agreed. "I've drafted a statement explaining that you were rescued after the attack and have been recovering in seclusion. Your subsequent marriage can be presented as a private matter that happened during your recovery. Most people will be so happy to learn you're alive that they won't question the details too closely." And so, as the new year of 1884 began, Tallulah Ryder officially returned to the land of the living. The news spread quickly through Miles City, and beyond the schoolteacher believed dead was alive, married, and expecting a child. As Foster had predicted, the joy of her survival overshadowed questions about the circumstances. In March, as the first crocuses pushed through the melting snow, Tallulah gave birth to a son they named Thomas James Weston Thomas for her father and James for the lawyer who had become a true friend. The baby had Finn's blue eyes and Tallulah's dark hair, a perfect blend of them both. "He's beautiful," Finn whispered, holding his son for the first time, awe and love mingling in his expression. "Perfect. He is," Tallulah agreed, exhausted but radiant. "Our miracle." As spring bloomed once again across the Montana landscape, the Westons settled into life as a family of three. Finn's horse breeding business prospered, and Tallulah continued to teach the children of distant homesteads, often with little Thomas strapped to her back or cradled in a sling across her chest. Word came that Victor Blackwell had been sentenced to 5 years in prison, his ranch and holdings sold to pay restitution to those he had wronged. The news brought a sense of justice, though Tallulah had long since moved beyond thoughts of revenge. Her life with Finn and Thomas filled her days with joy and purpose that left little room for dwelling on past wrongs. One evening in late spring, as Tallulah sat on the porch nursing Thomas while Finn sketched the sunset-lit mountains, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "You ever think about how different our lives might have been?" she asked. "If Blackwell's men hadn't attacked me, if you hadn't found me in the snow?" Finn set aside his sketchbook and moved to sit beside her, his arms slipping around her shoulders as he gazed down at their son. "I used to believe life was just a series of random events, some good, some bad, with no particular meaning," he said thoughtfully. "But now I'm not so sure. What are the chances that I would ride that exact trail at that exact moment in a snowstorm I nearly decided to wait out?" He pressed a kiss to Tallulah's temple. "Maybe some things are meant to be, no matter what path we take to get there." "I like that thought," Tallulah said, leaning into his embrace, "that we would have found each other somehow, somewhere. In this life or the next," Finn agreed. Thomas finished nursing, and Tallulah adjusted her clothing before handing the baby to Finn, who cradled his son with practiced ease. As the last light of day painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, the small family sat together on their porch, surrounded by the wilderness that had both threatened and sheltered them. "I love you, Finn Weston," Tallulah said softly, watching her husband with their child. "Every day a little more than the day before." "And I love you," he replied, the simple words carrying the weight of everything they'd overcome together. "From the moment I found you in the snow, though I didn't know it then." As darkness settled over the Montana mountains, stars appeared one by one in the vast sky. Inside the cabin that had become a true home, a lamp glowed warm and welcoming. Scout lay on the hearth rug, the cradle stood ready for Thomas's bedtime, and books lined shelves that Finn had built with his own hands. It was a life neither Tallulah nor Finn had dared to imagine before fate brought them together, a life built from the ashes of violence and loss, transformed by love into something beautiful and enduring. As they carried their sleeping son inside, closing the door against the cool night air, they stepped fully into the future they had created together, a future born in the moment. A cowboy wrapped a beaten woman in furs and took her in from the snow. 5 years later, the Weston homestead had grown into a thriving ranch. Finn's skill with horses had earned him a reputation throughout the territory, and buyers came from as far as Denver to purchase his stock. The cabin was now a proper house with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and Tallulah's pride a small schoolroom where she taught not only Thomas, but also the children from 3 neighboring homesteads. Thomas, now 5, had been joined by a sister, Emma Rose, who at 3 years old already showed her father's talent for charming animals and her mother's love of books. Tallulah was expecting their 3rd child in the autumn, and the family's happiness seemed complete. On a warm summer evening, as Tallulah watched Finn teaching Thomas how to groom a new foal, a rider appeared on the road leading to their home. She recognized James Foster immediately, though his visits had become less frequent as his legal practice in Miles City expanded. "James," she called, waving from the porch. "What a lovely surprise." Foster dismounted, accepting the glass of lemonade Tallulah offered after greeting Finn and tousling Thomas's hair. They settled on the porch, the children playing nearby under Finn's watchful eye. "I have news," Foster said, his expression serious but not grim. "Victor Blackwell was released from prison last month." Tallulah tensed, her hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly. "Has he returned to Miles City?" "No," Foster assured her, "and he won't. The terms of his release forbid him from returning to Montana territory. He's gone to California, apparently, to live with a cousin." Relief washed over Tallulah. The specter of Blackwell had faded over the years, but the news of his release had momentarily revived old fears. "That's the end of it then," Finn said, joining them on the porch. "He can't hurt anyone here again." "There's more," Foster continued. "Before he left, Blackwell asked to see me. He wanted me to give you something, Tallulah." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a sealed envelope. "He insisted I deliver it personally." Tallulah took the envelope with trepidation. Her name was written on the front in an unfamiliar hand. She broke the seal and unfolded a single sheet of paper. "Mrs. Weston," it began, "you don't know me, but I know what my brother did to you. Victor has confessed everything to me during his imprisonment. I cannot undo his actions, but I can offer my most sincere apology and assurance that he will never return to trouble you or your family. He is a changed man, or at least, a man trying to change. Prison has a way of stripping away pretense. Please know that I will ensure he keeps his distance and starts anew elsewhere. With deepest regrets, Margaret Blackwell Davis." Tallulah handed the letter to Finn, watching his expression as he read it. When he finished, their eyes met in silent understanding. The chapter was truly closed. "Thank you for bringing this, James," Tallulah said, folding the letter and returning it to the envelope. "It brings a certain peace to know that chapter of our lives is finally ended." "Not just ended," Finn added, his arm slipping around Tallulah's waist, "but transformed into something beautiful." He gestured to their home, their children, the life they'd built together. Everything that matters came from that terrible night. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the yard, Tallulah looked at the family gathered on the porch, Finn with Emma on his knee, Thomas leaning against his side, James Foster raising his glass in a silent toast to their happiness. The horror of that winter night when she'd been beaten and left for dead in the snow seemed to belong to another lifetime, to another woman. "I've been thinking," Finn said later that night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on the swell of their unborn child. "If it's a boy, what would you think of naming him Victor?" Tallulah turned to him in surprise. "Victor, why would we name our child after the man who nearly killed me?" Finn's eyes were thoughtful in the lamplight. "Not after him. The name means conqueror or winner. And that's what we've done, isn't it? We've conquered the past, won our future." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "But if you don't like it—" "No," Tallulah interrupted, considering the idea. "I do like it. Victor Weston," she smiled. "A reminder that love conquers all, even the darkest nights. Even the deepest snows," Finn added, pulling her closer. As they drifted toward sleep, Tallulah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a brutal attack on a snowy night to the warm security of their home and family. The path had not always been easy, but every step had led them here, to a life richer and more fulfilling than either had dared to imagine. In the room down the hall, Thomas and Emma slept peacefully. In the stables, Finn's horses rested under the watchful eye of Scout, now gray-muzzled but still loyal. And in the vast Montana sky, stars shone down on the home where a cowboy and the woman he'd rescued from the snow had built a life from the ashes of violence, a testament to the enduring power of compassion, courage, and love. The child born that autumn was indeed a boy, and they named him Victor James Weston, a name that celebrated not the man who had once sought to destroy Tallulah, but the victory of their love over hatred and violence. As the years passed, their family and ranch continued to thrive. Thomas grew into a young man with his father's way with horses and his mother's thoughtful nature. Emma became known throughout the region for her beautiful singing voice, and young Victor showed an early talent for drawing, just like his father. Tallulah's resurrection had long since become simply another colorful tale in Miles City's history. When asked about it, she would smile and say only that fate had a way of turning the darkest moments into doorways to unexpected joy. The full story remained private, shared only within the family as a testament to how love could transform lives. On cold winter nights, when snow blanketed the Montana landscape and wind howled around their sturdy home, Finn and Tallulah would often sit before the fire, hands clasped, surrounded by the family they had created together. And in those moments, the memory of that first night when a cowboy had wrapped a beaten woman in furs and carried her to safety was transformed from a nightmare into the first chapter of their shared story. A story of rescue, healing, and enduring love that would be passed down through generations of Westons for years to come.